One. Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I have to say today's probably a little bit selfish on my part because I found something that I want to learn about and is very timely in my life. So forgive me up front for something that I want to learn about. I learn every week about something. This one is very applicable to me. And there's a couple things that I want to start off with. I want to quote our today's guest, and I just see if this resonates with you the way that it resonated with me. If you're like many of us, you work 50 to 60 hours in an office, or you take work home and weekends and try to juggle the rest of your life as well. It gets overwhelming, doesn't it? And I got to that point, I'm like, yeah, you know what? That is kind of overwhelming. So the next three words are mine. I need help. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go right to the source. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Suzanne Falter, author and podcaster. How are you today?
I'm delighted to be here. That's how I am.
Awesome. Well, I'm super stoked because I'm like, then I find this 10 ways to stop being insanely busy. And I looked at them and I have to say, Suzanne, none of them did I think were going to be there. So, I'll leave that as a little teaser. If you're interested, you can find this information out. But I looked at these 10 and I'm like, where's delegation or multitasking? I mean, I was looking for some of these and they weren't there. They were all awesome self-care stuff. So the two words we're going to focus on today is self-care. So tell me, if I need help in that situation, if I'm overwhelmed, which a lot of business owners, entrepreneurs, sales professionals are right now, how do you start with somebody like that? What goes on in that situation?
Okay, so just a little backstory.
Yeah.
Because I think this will set the context. I was a driven workaholic working 60, 70 hours a week with a very successful internet marketing business in 2012. And the business actually burned itself out. I was coaching so much I had to stop.
Okay.
And everything fell apart simultaneously. The business, my relationship, the home I had just moved into with this partner, that all just went away. And I was left kind of in my car driving around trying to figure out the next thing and trying to figure out where I wanted to live. And I didn't even have a network of friends because I was new to the Bay Area.
Okay.
And my 22-year-old daughter, Teal, who had come out to California and joined me, died extremely suddenly from a medically unexplainable cardiac arrest.
Oh.
So her death brought me literally to my knees and made me stop all of the overwork, all of the frenetic running in circles, trying to figure out the next thing because I couldn't bear not to know, all of the values that had turned sideways and delivered me to a place of, really not having control of my life and not even liking my work. Sure. I felt I was in a world that I didn't even belong in, even though I had the skills and I had a background in marketing. I was kind of surrounded by people making choices I would never make. And I went along with it because I thought I had to, because I didn't realize I could take control of my life. So I didn't work for 2 years, Dave. I did a lot of taking care of people's pets, cooking little meals for my friend, and I lived in her guest room. And I mean, I was like super minimal in everything I did.
Sure.
And when I was ready to return to work, I tried to start up that business and it wouldn't even start because it was so off kilter for me. Sure. So the place you start is to be willing to stop and look very seriously at everything you're doing. That's what self-care really is. It's not about strategizing the productivity or the scheduling or the, action items. It's not about that. Right. It's about tuning into yourself and becoming quiet enough and slowing down enough that you
Mhm.
can hear what you
Sure.
need. And, for some people that looks like a week where they go away from their current life and they get a, little cabin somewhere, or a hotel room or whatever, Airbnb, and they just like sit with the intention of really figuring out what they need and what works and what doesn't, and letting go of what doesn't and being willing to move towards what does work. For some people, it means massive change. It did for me. I
Sure.
totally changed my work, my life, my relationship, where I lived, the city I lived in, everything changed.
Mm.
For other
Wow.
people, it's minor. It's
Sure.
like, I'm not going to work through lunch. I'm
Yeah.
not going to allow my guilt to keep me chained to my desk long past the end of work. I'm not going to overproduce. I mean, there's so many, this is just the beginning of the
Yeah.
conversation, but
Yep.
there are certain key basics I learned that are really what this is about, and they aren't what you'd think.
Wow. Well, and that's oh my gosh, there's so much there. So, I mean, I wrote down take control of your life because I'm sure we've all seen that. We've all heard that concept. We've all heard those words in a sentence together. Um, but it's like saying it, hearing it, and doing it are such different things, right? So, I mean, and the other piece is I've sat and tried to do those exact things. I'm going to take a day, or I'm going to take X number of hours, whatever, and I'm just going to focus on something, whatever that is. And for some odd reason, like 5 minutes into it, something comes up, right? I mean,
Well, that's why you have
crazy,
to leave, first of all.
right?
You have to really
Exactly.
make
But
a
it's
commitment to it.
even in my mind, Suzanne, I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to do this first, or I better go get a drink of water, or I better go bring. I mean, it's just like this, and maybe it's just me, but I'm probably resonating with a few people that are listening right now that are like, yeah, I've tried it myself, and I almost feel like I need to get away in a hospital bed where they like paralyze me from the neck down so that I'm forced to sit there and think, because I'm always got to be doing something. So I really want to understand this first step of self-care, because I can't even, I've never got there. I've tried, I failed at it. I'm not down on myself for it. I just know that it's really hard for a business owner, entrepreneur, whoever's listening, to just like stop, put it in park.
Right,
I'll take
right.
I'll take my foot off the gas, maybe I'll put it in neutral, but boy, to put it in park, turn off the key, and then throw the key away, that's really hard. So do you have
Yeah,
any advice for us that are struggling at that spot, Suzanne?
sure. I mean, the place to start, if you can't take yourself away and really deeply reevaluate everything in your life, is to begin
Yeah.
with the simple question, what do I need right now?
Okay.
And I think most of us can't really hear the answer. And, there are activities, there's meditation, there's slow, thoughtful walks, there's hanging out with your pet, there's sitting and doing nothing for half an hour. I mean,
Right.
these are smaller challenges, which might be a good intermediary place to start.
Sure.
But
Sure.
this question, what do I need right now? It's worth sitting with the question. It's worth considering it while you take your shower.
Sure.
It's worth considering it while you're sitting, like I said, with a dog in the backyard, or you're taking a walk by yourself. It's like, what do I need right now? And often what we need is for someone to listen to us, or we need to have a cry, or we need to really set some boundaries with someone, or we need to ask for help in a place where we think we ordinarily wouldn't deserve to ask for help.
Sure.
These are the practical day-to-day aspects of self-care that take us far deeper than superficial self-care, which would be, if I just go away for a weekend, I'll feel fine, and then I'll get back to being a workaholic and it'll all be fine. It won't be fine.
Yeah. Right.
We all need to have permission to fall apart
Right.
sometimes,
Wow.
and some of us have to fall apart for 2 years like I did, or some of
Sure.
us have to fall apart for 20 minutes,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really matter how long, just that you let yourself go.
Well, and falling apart sounds like I'm just gonna. To me, it sounds like a negative.
Mm.
So, it's interesting because probably don't look at it that way. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to keep it together here. I can't fall apart, right?
Boy, is it
So,
overrated. That is
yeah,
so
exactly.
overrated,
Well, oh
right?
my gosh, I have this image to hold up or whatever it is for the people listening. And I tend
Yeah.
to just, probably be more vulnerable than most people. So I know that for me, there's times that, yeah, I don't want to hold it together right now, but boy, there are a lot of people in my mind, at least, that are like depending on me. Maybe nobody is, and maybe I could
Ah.
be gone tomorrow and no one would know, right? But I think that that's interesting was what do I need right now? So when I wrote that down because I'm like, what do I need right now? Is it um physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of the above? I mean, is there any cap on
Yeah.
where do you want me to
Yeah,
go?
it can be a Reuben sandwich. I mean, it really
Okay.
doesn't matter. It's
Okay.
like it's a practice of listening to yourself. It's a
Okay.
practice of tuning in because for us super busy people, entrepreneurs, been an entrepreneur for 40 years myself, I know
Okay.
this turf. It is all about external focus and hitting your goals and what's your income base this month, and what are you making happen, and who's going to
Yep.
be pleased and who's going to be displeased, and what risks are you willing to take, and what's going to be interesting and new to try. It's all external. The internal focus is the return to the questions that allow you to understand what you need.
Okay.
For me, I loved being an entrepreneur because it kept me outside of myself. I was, obviously very outside of myself by the time my business crashed and burned and everything fell apart. I had financial goals. I really wanted to make a lot of money. And I
Hmm.
was in a industry where it was possible and I had a lot of experience, so I knew how to do it well.
Sure.
But I was totally ignoring the fact that I didn't care about this work, that it was meaningless to me, that just because I could do it didn't mean I should do it. And, I just honestly think that this level of question, we need to ask ourselves, am I on the right track? You know? And to your question about what's included in the question, what do I need right now? Well, yes, anything. It can
Okay.
be anything. And we got to start somewhere. So maybe you start with, I need a 15-minute walk. Great.
Sure.
You know?
Are people afraid to really ask that question because they're afraid of the answer? Or I mean, I feel like that's a really deep question, and I'm almost afraid to ask because what if I'm supposed to be building a school in Mongolia or whatever, right?
Mhm,
What if
mhm.
what if I come to the realization that where I am today is not where I should be, want to be, need to be, whatever? I
Yeah.
mean, that's like brutal. I mean, it's so much
Well,
easier out of
it
sight, out of
can
mind,
be.
right?
It
Yeah.
can be or not, because
Okay.
for you to, rip up stakes and say, "Oh, sorry, school in Mongolia, you're not going to happen."
Yep.
Maybe that's not the way it rolls. Maybe a way it rolls is, I need help with the school in Mongolia. I'm going to
Okay.
bring in partners and I'm going
Okay.
to reduce my equity share or whatever it's going to be.
Gotcha.
Maybe it's about, like I said earlier, it's about, what do I need right now? I need to stop having headaches. Why am I having headaches? I'm
Mm,
having headaches because I'm dealing with XYZ people who are so difficult. Maybe I
gotcha.
need to let go of some clients, or I need to rearrange my team. I mean, there are things that can be done that will
Okay.
help us get back to alignment. For me, I had to have a totally different career, but I
Okay.
also had a life that had spent 20 years going off track. So,
Gotcha.
you
Sure.
know, big off track, big
Yep.
redirection, right?
Big fix. Yeah. Okay. Well, and I think that I think in black or white.
Yeah.
And I know that I do, and I'm working on in my life to realize that there's some gray areas in life.
Yeah.
But, like I just said, in my mind, I'm like, okay, I either am here at what I'm doing in, the United States, or I have to be in Mongolia building a school. There's no in between,
Yeah.
Suzanne. And I think that's where, again, my blind spot is that, because I could donate money to it. I could find somebody else to do it. There's plenty of other things, but in a black and white world that I live in, and probably other people might live in that world as well, I think that that's really hard to do. And so that's the self-care piece that I wanted to learn about. Was I'm not going to get from A to B in 30 seconds as much as I wish it was. So I know that there's some steps along the way, and some of those steps, like you wrote, were, turn off your phone. One
Yeah.
of the ways that you can, if you're insanely busy, turn off your phone. And I know right now people listening are like, what? Are you kidding? That's just going to be worse when I turn that phone back on. So kind of elaborate just for fun on that one, because I'm really interested to learn more about that.
One of the things I did when my daughter died was that I did turn off my phone. I actually got rid of my smartphone. This is 2012, kind of early days of smartphones. And I
Sure.
bought a little, what you would now call a burner phone or a cell phone, just a little flip phone.
Yep.
And I barely used it. And I didn't use it for 2 years because I really knew I needed to be very quiet and I didn't want to be contacted by a lot of people.
Sure.
And that was a good example of tuning in. So it taught me that our phones are designed to addict us, and they're designed to pull our focus out away from ourselves and into the news feed or the client texts or the email stream or whatever it is that we like to focus on, social,
Sure.
media, et cetera. So when we quiet our minds is when we can hear ourselves think. All I'm suggesting is self-care begins with really listening to yourself. And so when you remove the distractions, you
Okay.
really get some wonderful ways to sort of bring down the intensity level. It might be as simple as not watching TV for a couple of nights and instead doing something totally different, maybe listening to some music or just sitting quietly in front of a fire, or
Yeah.
and see what happens. I mean, I think one of the big things that needs to be said about this process, because I hear you about the black and white and
Yeah.
how do I downgrade that? What if everything was an experiment? What if everything was an experiment? When
Yeah.
everything is an experiment, there's so much less pressure on us to get it all right.
Wow. That's interesting. Well, hey, business owner, you've been an entrepreneur your whole life, right? So
Yes.
you don't want to experiment with other people's money, or you don't want to experiment with other people's whatever. So, that's again, I go right back to black and white.
Okay, but here I'm going to give you some pushback.
Good. I
Because
want it. That's why I mean that,
that's what
just you and me.
this
Just you
is,
and me
because
here,
this
so.
has been a very long, slow learning for me,
Sure.
because I too was a huge black and white thinker.
Okay.
And then when everything ended, and it really wasn't supposed to end, it was supposed to keep on going. I didn't know what I was going to do for 2 years at all. I had no idea. And I started to experiment in the vein of, let me try this and see if it works. Let me try that and see if it works. And that experimentation kept up for about 7 years.
Wow.
And during that time, little things would flare up that'd be kind of interesting. For a while, I was speaking on the organ transplantation circuit because I had donated my daughter's organs, and that didn't really like catch fire. There's always like a little interest, but not a lot. For a while, I was writing a lot for other publications and websites. It was like I just had all kinds of things going on.
Sure.
But it wasn't until I really took what I had learned and put it into some kind of form that it felt right in my gut, and it felt like what I was supposed to do. And immediately the agent, the book deal, and the podcast and a Facebook group came in that like ballooned to 55,000 just in a matter of weeks. I mean, the whole thing just took off.
Sure.
Then the universe was like, okay, this experiment we can go with. But I had to try a lot of things that failed and be willing to try them and not take it personally. That's the thing. We think it's about us, but it's really not.
Oh man. I don't know why you're in my brain. You're crawling around in there, because I thought about that exact same thing. Is experiment, means there's a potential for failure, or there's a
Yeah, yeah.
potential for it not working. And I can't admit that. You guys are nuts, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
that's
Yeah,
where
yeah.
I go back to that image of a business owner. And, I always laugh when people say, oh, you own your own business. That must be awesome. You set your own hours and blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, okay. If you only knew what was really going on, right? It's so
Touche.
funny. It's so funny. So, well,
And I want to address what you said, if I may,
yeah,
Dave,
for
about
sure.
it's not an experiment if I lose all my clients' money, because
Yeah.
that's a really good point. It's where I'm holding experimentation is experiment and do the best you can.
Okay.
Not like be dilettante, not like don't show up responsibly.
Sure.
Do what you can do, but be
Sure.
willing to know that even if it fails, even if you do lose your client's money, even if, bad stuff happens,
Yeah.
it's all going to lead you to something better. It
Yep.
really will. If what you're doing is legal, at least,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you know what I'm
Yep.
saying, though?
Oh, I
It's
do.
like the biggest failures are usually between our own ears. It's our ego feeling bruised.
Right.
And I think when you lose a lot, like I did, what you learn is nothing in the end is as nearly as grave and serious as we think it is,
Sure. Sure.
you know?
Wow. Why is it so hard for me? And again, this is me, so no one listened to this question because it doesn't apply to anybody but me. I'm just curious, why is it so hard for me to be able to think that it's okay for me to do that? You said something like that in early on about, it's not okay for you to do something, or you got to give yourself permission to do
Right.
something. Yeah, I mean, why in the world at 50 some years old, why am I still like not there? It's just so weird. I felt guilty. Like I told you before, I was in San Diego last week and it was 80 degrees and beautiful. And
Mm,
I'm trying really hard to not feel guilty. I'm trying really
mm,
hard not to be like, oh, what are my clients thinking? All this kind of trash comes up. So,
mm.
how does that self-care model address that stuff that is inside me wanting to control me that really shouldn't be?
Because self-care is really a concept that nurtures you. It's
Okay.
the self-care conversation to have with yourself is what can I forgive myself for? What can I allow myself that I've been forbidding myself?
Okay.
What can I accept that has seemed so unacceptable? Self-care is about giving ourselves a break. I learned in those years after my daughter died that I was actually just fine the way I was. I always thought I had to work really hard to prove something to someone, that I
Sure.
was, compensating for this very flawed person. And I wasn't as flawed as I thought I was.
Hmm.
In fact, I lived with my good friend Linda. She's one of my buddies. And I remembered coming downstairs. I was just thinking I might start dating again. This is after a couple of years of,
Hmm.
grieving. I was like, I'm thinking I might want to date, but what do you think? Am I worthy? She's
Yeah.
like, oh, Suzanne, you are so worthy. I still have her in my head because it
Oh
just
my
cracks
gosh.
me up. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's
are you
awesome.
kidding? Of
Yeah.
course you're
Yep.
worthy. And
Yep.
and it was like slap, slap, slap. It was just
Yep.
great. And and
Wow.
and honestly, those thoughts are there and they're real and they're
Sure.
loud. They're so
Sure.
loud.
Yep.
And yet our job is to just notice them
Okay.
and forgive ourselves because
Sure.
we're doing the best we can, most
Yeah.
of us. We really
Wow.
are.
Well, and it's so funny because I give get out of jail free cards all the time to people around me, customers,
Of
friends,
course.
family, all the time. At least I think I do. Hopefully, if you guys are listening, tell me if I'm not, if it's a blind spot for me. But what's really hard for me in this case, Suzanne, is to give myself that get out of jail
Yeah.
free card. It's really hard, you
Mhm.
know, I mean, especially like for me, I always am trying to eat the right thing. And so at the end of the day, it's like, you know what? The last thing I want right now is a salad. I want a dang cheeseburger, right? And it's like, no,
Yeah,
no, you can't have a cheeseburger.
right.
It's like,
Yeah.
it's like it kind of permeates all over. And so that's why I really wanted to learn more tonight about this, was to find ways to, really improve my self-care, because I think of it like a car. I mean, when my oil light goes on, I know that if the sooner or later, if I don't address that oil light, tires, whatever the light, when there's a light that goes on in the car, if you don't address it, eventually something negative is going to happen.
Yeah,
And I feel like
that's
that's
right.
when we have an oil light that goes on in our life, whatever that is, that says, uh-oh, danger ahead. Why do we just keep plugging through? Why do we think, that'll be fine?
Look,
That oil light will go off by itself. Why do we have?
we're phobic about change. We're
Okay.
phobic about change. I mean, everybody is. Excuse me.
Sure.
When you're phobic about change, it's hard to do anything that might
Okay.
put you out of your comfort zone.
Yep.
And why wouldn't we be phobic about change? We're living through a global pandemic, 100-year event,
Yep.
global warming, whatever you think of it.
Sure.
There is so much strife in our world.
Right.
These are conditions that make it feel unsafe
Mhm.
to do anything differently, even if what we're doing is fundamentally unsatisfying. But I say it's a great excuse for doing things differently, because you're being given circumstances that really are showing you how hard life is and how critical it is that you head for the joy and head for the light and go for the things that you really do want, that you
Sure.
really, really, really know you deserve, or you would really like to believe you deserve, even if you don't feel like you deserve them, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Wow. Well, and that's like, I mean, it's so easy. Again, I go back to, it's so easy for me to give other people grace and mercy, and then I don't do it for myself. So I'm practicing that now, is to be able to find something that I enjoy and just be able to, we purchased a Jeep a couple years ago when the pandemic just started. It was like July of 2020. And we were like, my wife and I are like, man, if we don't get out of this house, we're going to hurt each other. So we invest in a Jeep, take the doors off, take the roof off. And for the summer, we just loved it. And it was just
Great.
it was such healing and such, a positive experience. So I see them, they work. I just don't want it to be where it's a pandemic that causes me to make these changes. I want it to be like just these, I just want to do it for no reason other than, hey, it's a small course correction. I'd really like to do this, whatever this is.
Yeah,
So,
but at the end of your life, Dave, you're not going to care how you got there. You're just going to care
right.
that you did get there.
But
I mean, would I have chosen my daughter's death to be the catalyzing event of my recovery in my life? Hell no.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
we take what we get, right?
Yep.
And we don't have to have anything be
Yep.
the spark that sets us free, or we could have something cataclysmic. It's kind of up to us.
Sure.
Right. I was highly resistant to any kind of real, fundamental change to how I rolled through life.
And I think for everybody listening, I mean, that's such a great spot to be in. If you're looking, if self-care is something that you haven't really invested much time in, this is a great spot to start. And it's not like you have to make these, huge course corrections. You can do, like Suzanne said, just some small stuff. Maybe turn your phone off during lunch. Maybe start by having lunch.
Yeah,
it took me a long time to justify in my mind that, my gosh, it's 11:30, 12 o'clock, whatever, 2 o'clock, whatever. I'm hungry. I think I'm going to stop. And, it's like, oh my gosh, you're such a bad leader, for yourself. So if you're listening to that and you haven't ever done that, I just want to encourage you to find a small thing to start, because it's a lot easier to start with a small thing, like she said, than to start with a huge thing. And a lot of those 10 ways to stop being insanely busy were smaller pieces. I mean, you know, some were big, but some like, you know, practice your breathing, or, you know, take back your lunch, or turn your phone off for a little bit, you know, take a nap. Those are some smaller things I think that we can actually do, you know, right away after listening to this, and commit to doing that. Because otherwise, if we say, yeah, we'll start that tomorrow, tomorrow comes and most likely that self-care doesn't really, you know, ever get started. So
The whole key is willingness. What are we willing to give ourselves? And for many of us listening to this, we may think, I'm fine. I had a vacation in 2005. You know, I mean, really, we're not willing to give ourselves much. And
yeah,
when you look at my my day-to-day schedule, somebody asked me the other day, what's your typical day? And like the self-care goes on and on and on. And they're like, wow. I was a little embarrassed, actually. I was kind of like, okay, but hey, I'm 63, you know.
yeah,
This is
wow,
what it's like when you're older.
that's funny. Yeah. Yeah, you know, you feel guilty if you know, for me, if you get your, you know, get your hair cut during the day, or you know,
Right,
do something like
right.
that. People kind of are like, what? You know,
Mhm.
that, are you kidding? That's what nights and weekends are for, but it's
Right.
whatever it is. As we start to land this today, I wanted to ask another question, because let's assume now that we've, you know, started the journey of self-care. We've
Mhm.
started to create some habits, and we started to, you know, see some cool things happening. How do we keep that momentum going? Because I don't want it to be like, oh, I did it for a month and now I can go back to the way that I was. How do you turn that
Mm.
into like a habit in your life? How did you do that on your end?
Right. Well, I'm a big fan of the mini habit, and mini habits are tiny habits which are so easy that they just kind of spark you to keep on going. For instance, the guy who created them started by telling himself it was okay to do one push-up. Got down on the floor, did one push-up. He's like, well, hell, I'll just do 10. You know, I mean, that's
Down
kind of
here.
how it goes, right?
Right.
So, you know, give yourself 10 minutes at lunch. Give
Okay.
yourself turn off the television 15 minutes earlier than you ordinarily would. You
Okay.
know, buy a little notebook and write in it for 1 minute. You know, these are small habitual ways to
Sure. Gotcha.
build the process of tuning in. In the book that I developed around this, The Extremely Busy Woman's Guide to Self-Care, I have a lot of
Mhm.
little questionnaires, because I think it's great to answer questionnaires because they're kind of quick and easy, and they get your mind going, and they make you think about things you might not have considered. So
Sure.
asking yourself lots of little questions like that is a fun way to really get the ball rolling. And then you
Gotcha.
put it in your calendar. You know, if you find that 10 minutes at lunch works for you, then put a half an hour lunch on your calendar and pay as much attention to it as you would a client meeting. And
Sure.
even if you're really uncomfortable, do it, and notice if you're uncomfortable, because then you'll learn something about yourself, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, if you don't put, I encourage people all the time, put whatever on your calendar you want to, you know, make a difference. Because if
Yeah.
it stays in your brain, you know, like this podcast right now, if it wouldn't have been on either one of our calendars, it may
Mm,
or may not have happened. So,
right.
you know, I think it's really important to do that. You know, we schedule a date night and I'm like, why is it just one a week? Where did this come from? You know, let's,
Yeah,
you know,
good one.
and I feel all like, you know, I feel like the big man on campus, because yeah, my wife and I do one night a week. You know, it's like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, what about the other six? You know,
all right,
so I
good.
think that that's totally cool. There's so much here. I so appreciate you sharing this stuff with us. I just want to know two more questions, and I'm going to let you go. What's Suzanne Falter's tip of the week for people listening?
Oh, a tip of the week. Well, I'd say 20 minutes in nature every day,
Ooh,
because, you know, 20 minutes in nature, walking in nature is equivalent to 2 hours of walking in an urban setting. That has
really?
actually been researched. So 20-minute walk in nature, take the edge off.
There you go. That's awesome. Yeah. And beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day, doesn't really matter, I'm assuming.
Well, you know, it depends on where you're going.
Sure.
Is it like, do you really want to be there in the pitch black? Do you have a headlamp? I mean,
Hey, you never
right?
know, right? You never know what's going to happen. So that's cool. 20 minutes of nature a day. What a great goal that would be. And again, I challenge you listening. You know what? And if it can't be 20, maybe it's 10. Start at 5. I don't start at 1 minute for the push-up, right? It's a place to start, and it becomes intentional, and then most likely you're going to enjoy it, and it becomes longer and longer. So that is so cool. So the last question is, what's one thing that most people listening don't know about you that you'd feel comfortable sharing?
Well, that I'm a passionate cook, that I love to fool around in the kitchen, and
Oh my
that I
gosh.
grew up with a mother who was a dedicated French chef and taught me everything she knew. And now I'm really into the Instant Pot.
So what? Just throw like everything in and see what happens?
It's pretty cool. The Instant Pot is a piece of machinery that I bought at Costco. It was not that expensive, and it sautés, and it stews, and it pressure cooks, and it's like the modern pressure cooker, and it's just a beautiful little machine, and really a lot of fun to play with if you're into exploring in the kitchen.
So what's your favorite meal to cook?
Gosh, well, I just made a beautiful sautéed bulk sausage with Brussels sprouts and pickled red onions, and it was just delicious, utterly delicious. That was yesterday. I mean, I have kind of a different favorite every day. Tonight, we're going to make a little fried rice with some bok choy and some shiitake mushrooms.
Ooh, that sounds
to that.
Good. That one I would definitely try. So unfortunately, you're in California, I'm in Wisconsin, so it'll take a little bit of time for me to get there, but save me some, okay?
All right. Will do.
Cool. So for everybody again listening, we do this every week to try and just shed a little bit of light on something that you may not fully be aware of. And for me personally, self-care was something that I understand the concept. I thought I did, and now I understand it even more. And now I have to do something with it. So, I want to look at these things and contemplate what I'm going to do. And I love the one that you had about find a buddy, because I think the accountability piece is really helpful. And I'm assuming that's kind of where you would jump in, is if people were listening and wanted to learn more about that. Is that accountability something that you get involved with?
No, I just recommend you get involved with it. I'm not a coach. Exactly. I'm a podcaster and I'm an author.
There you go. Okay.
Right.
I can't call you at 2 in the morning then. All right.
No,
gotcha.
No, you can't do that. Gotcha. But my podcast does have, I have a lot of folks on there talking about all different aspects of self-care, because self-care goes from everything from brewing the perfect cup of tea to really understanding emotional intelligence. So I welcome people over to the Self-Care for Extremely Busy Women podcast, and whether you're a woman or a man, just did a bunch of shows about self-care for men. So
awesome. Cool. And the name of the book is the same, right?
The book is called almost the same. It's called The Extremely Busy Woman's Guide to Self-Care.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. Yeah. And all of this, so if somebody is listening that wants to get in contact with you, learn more about you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, I have a website, Suzanne Falter, SuzanneFalter.com.
Perfect. That is so cool. Well, thank you. I'm sure that you get these questions all the time. And but I had to ask, because like I said, I know nobody listening but me needed this today. So thank you so much for making yourself vulnerable, sharing some of the tragedy that you've gone through, but also how that's transformed you into where you are today. So what a great story. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I look forward to learning more. And like I said, now I got notes, so I got to do something with these. So after I enjoy a cup of tea or something, then I'm going to jump back in and figure out what the next steps are. But thank you.
Or maybe just do nothing.
There you go. Right. Just stand there,
just be. right?
When I was a kid, one last thing, I'll let you go. When I was a kid, my parents would say, don't just stand there, do something,
All
right?
right, there you
And
go.
now I've learned the opposite. I'm like, don't just do something, stand there.
Stand there. Yeah, that's
So
right.
I'm kind of coming full circle on that. So
Mhm.
you helped me with that even more today. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and thanks for all that you're doing for all the people that you affect. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.